Good afternoon. YouTube user and fundamentalist Christian evangelist, shockofgod, has notoriously and for quite some time put forward to all atheists the question that he believes, if properly answered, will prove atheism to be a viable and worthwhile belief position, and otherwise prove it to be meaningless and or absurd. To clarify, his question is as follows: provide proof and evidence that atheism is accurate and correct. So, let's cover the possible answers, shall we? Response number 1. I consider myself an evangelist. I consider myself an atheist. I do not believe in a god or gods. The definition of atheism is the lack of belief in a god or gods. Therefore, atheism is accurate in its definition and correct in its application to myself. This is the simplest response, though shockofgod has reviewed it repeatedly in the past. Response number 2. This response assumes that shockofgod's question is intended to investigate the viability of a belief position, specifically regarding the denial of the existence of a god or gods. Strictly speaking, this is anti-theism, which is where the question breaks down when applied to atheism, but I'll assume for the moment the two are considered identical. Atheism is not a position of hating God or absolutely denying his existence, though many atheists prefer to take a null, if not antithetical, position on the matter. Furthermore, agnostic atheists are uncertain about the matter, but I digress. This interpretation is readily concluded with the burden of proof issue, which requires that those making the positive claim, that is to say, the claim that differs from the current known state, must provide evidence to support it beyond a reasonable doubt. In the current religious field, those claiming that a god exists must first provide evidence for their god. Until that time, atheism is actually the default position. Once a god has been proven to exist, atheism is then given the burden of proof to provide evidence that such an entity does not actually exist. This response has also been reviewed by shockofgod. Response number 3. We can reduce the question grammatically by combining like words. Accuracy and correctness, for example, are identical in typical meaning. That is to say that a claim has been evidenced to fact. Therefore, we can condense these two into just factual. Meanwhile, proof and evidence are also synonymous, as proof is evidence of something. Therefore, we can also condense these into simply evidence. This leaves us with provide evidence that atheism is factual. We can at this point refer back to response 1, but we can now actually take this a bit further via response 2. Because newborn babies have only life support information in their brains, and must thereafter learn to talk, read, walk, feed, and so on, it can be reasonably claimed that they are unaware of religion in its entirety. They cannot read holy books, they cannot take communion, they cannot pray or perform religious rituals, and if they could, they certainly would not grasp the meaning of them, lacking an understanding of basic mathematics, let alone the divine proclamations of their Lord. Therefore, all humans are born as atheists. We could also take this a step further again to incorporate the notion that an all-powerful God, even if he wished to grant humans free will, would instill in them an innate knowledge of the belief structure he wished them to follow. For example, to face Mecca while praying, or to pray before bed each night, or to not eat pork or seafood. As this is certainly not the case, we can either point to a non-intervening God or no God at all. As the former requires evidence for having a God first, we are left with the claim that there is no God. Response number 4. I will at this point attempt to answer shockofgod's question as it is originally posed and, I believe, intended, which is simply to prove that there is no God. This means passing the burden of proof away from those making the positive claim, and again, assumes that atheism is the negative position to undeific existence, but we'll wait for those issues for the moment. Firstly, there is the omni problem. That is to say that any god that has created the universe, all of mankind, and watches over each individual perpetually and can do whatever they wish, must therefore possess omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience. Omnipresence itself is sort of broken by the laws of physics, which says that a singular entity cannot exist in all places simultaneously. But we'll assume for the moment that God is, for whatever special reason, exempt from these laws of physics. Omnipotence and omniscience, on the other hand, there's the capacity to do anything and know everything, are mutually exclusive within a singular entity. If God is omnipotent, he can do anything. Since he also possesses omniscience, he knows what will happen in the future. If he can choose to deviate from that future, he does not actually possess omniscience, as no alternative future exists to know before it actually is created. Similarly, if he knows the total and complete future, absolute causal knowledge, including every action he could ever possibly undertake. He is not omnipotent, as he cannot deviate from what he foresees of his own future. Therefore, any entity possessing the three omnis cannot exist, as they are mutually exclusive. However, this is a logic problem. Ideally, there should be some evidence to support this. Due to the invisible pink unicorn issue, we cannot examine God, him, or herself. So we must discern their nature by using evidence within our own realm of understanding the universe. We can reasonably say that evidence should be apparent, as any god that purposefully makes it impossible for us to discern their nature and existence, and then demands glory and worship, is in effect ensuring that all of mankind cannot actually meet its requests. Prayer is the most common element of religion. Usually it is construed as direct requests made to God. Therefore, those that pray should be demonstrably more likely to receive divine intervention of some sort in their lives. For example, a loved one returning from a terminal illness safe and well. Indeed, there are many examples of these so-called miraculous recoveries within religious families. However, there are also an equal amount of occurrences for such events within the a-religious as well as events with not nearly quite so positive outcomes on both sides. Consequently, prayer does not seem to have any significant effect, speaking subjectively and objectively. This could be due, however, to the notion of God's divine plan, meaning that God cannot in fact deviate from a previous scheme, the nature of which we mortals are incapable of comprehending. This violates omnipotence, so we'll for the moment assume that he's actually capable and just chooses not to. Individual prayers, therefore, that go unanswered must logically have gone against God's plan, and those that were answered didn't. If the outcome then is indistinguishable from natural law, we cannot then infer such a God exists. Moreover, it means that actually praying is far less productive than looking for a mortal solution. If we assume omniscience as well, God would have been fully capable of providing human individuals with the tools and capabilities necessary to overcome their trials beforehand. But this means that they were also aware of such hardships and chose not to eliminate them in the first place, thus needlessly subjecting humans to ordeals of pain, hunger, and depression throughout time. A lack of evidence should not be considered to be evidence of a lack, however, as many studies of species were. And similarly, mere inactivity cannot be considered as an absolute lack of a watchful deity. To do so properly would require absolute knowledge, omniscience, of the universe. However, if indeed there is such a God, which still would not disprove the actual meaning of atheism, again, it's not saying anything about whether or not a God exists, just that we don't believe in them, given their apparent indifference to the prayers of the faithful, as well as their apparent willingness to let thousands die needlessly in squalor and starvation on a daily basis, even if there is some kind of eternal blissful afterlife, can you honestly say that they deserve glory and worship? If such a being existed, I would not wish to stand in the same room as them, much less pay them tribute. Any being that actually did claim such tribute of a free-willed sentient being would be considered a dictator and a tyrant on earth. Why not then in heaven? I submit, therefore, that if God exists, he is not deserving of worship from the human lives he allows to perish in agony and depression, and in that context, along the lines of Christian dogma, which I cite only because it is remarkably still the national religion here in the United Kingdom, I would side wholeheartedly with Lucifer in the War of Heaven. Satan himself is at the very least generally spoken of as a proactive person in human affairs, whilst God, the wicked sloth, sits idly by his throne. And finally, response number 5. And I will admit this to be something of a low blow, but I ask you that you indulge me for just this moment. Shock of God professes to be Christian. Shock of God routinely films his videos whilst riding a motorbike in standard fatigues, designed to withstand high winds and cold temperatures whilst doing so. Those fatigues are made of leather and cotton, primarily. The Christian Bible commands that no believer wear clothes made of 2 different kinds of fabric. I cite Leviticus 19:19 for this. Additionally, Shock of God is a creationist, referring often to evolution as a hoax, a fairy tale, and a belief system in and of itself. Yet, scientific evidence can demonstrate plainly that the animals used to make the leather of his fatigues evolved from earlier organisms. So, at the least, Shock of God cannot hurl stones, being not himself about sin, John 8:7, and at most is not in actuality a Christian. In fact, earlier in Deuteronomy 17:7, Shock of God's viewers, having witnessed his sins, are called to be the first to put him to death. My name is Mr. Starmatter, and I hope this video, such as it is, makes up in some small part for the recent inactivity of this channel.